Hello and welcome to another episode of the Horn Call podcast. This is James Bolden. I'm the publications editor for the International Horn Society and your host. This episode is very special for a couple of reasons. The first is that this will be the final Horn Call podcast episode before IHS 54. So this is going out around the middle of July 2022. And of course, IHS 54 begins right at the end of this month at Texas A&M University in Kingsville. And I will be there, as well will some of my students, and I hope to see you there. And if you are unable to attend in person, I hope that you will keep up with it in social media, the various ways that the IHS is going to promote this through social media and other channels, of course, this podcast. And, of course, you can read about it in the Horn Call afterwards. And if you are there, I hope that we get a chance to speak, even if it's only briefly. Those of you that are attending, safe travels and, good luck with everything. And I think it's going to be a fantastic week. So that's reason one. And then reason two is our guests for today's podcast. Among them is one of the featured artists at IHS 54, Christina Masha Turner, and of course the other members of the American Horn Quartet are not strangers in any way to the international horn community. Jeffrey Winter, Carrie Turner, and not the regular fourth horn player Denise Tryon, but a very special guest with the group at the time that this recording was made, Frank Lloyd. Speaking of this recording, this podcast was part of the 2021 Northeast Horn Workshop. The interview took place on March 27th, 2021, and this was one of the many virtual events that happened last year and the year before. And I got to hand it to the hosts, Jonas Toms and Albert Hood from West Virginia University. They did a marvelous job bringing together just a fantastic slate of guest artists. Among them was the American Horn Quartet with Frank Lloyd guesting on fourth horn in place of Denise Tryon. And I think this interview speaks for itself. Of course, the main thing here is I want to be sure to plug Christina's appearance upcoming at IHS 54, and she has quite a lot to say in this interview about her time with the American Horn Quartet, as well as a variety of other things. It's also worth noting that Denise Tryon is a guest, a featured artist at IHS 54 also, although she's not on this interview. That's another selling point of this interview with the American Horn Quartet. You're going to hear half of that group as featured artists at IHS 54 this year. One other thing I thought might be worth mentioning is that just prior to this podcast interview, the American Horn Quartet had given a fabulous live-streamed performance from the Philharmonie in Luxembourg, and you'll hear Carrie reference that. Carrie Turner will make reference to that near the beginning of the interview. All four of the fabulous members of this group get to give a little bit of background about themselves and their horn-playing life and their journey, and I think there's just such a wealth of information here. It's hard to even put it into words for this brief intro. So I'm going to let the interview speak for itself, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with the American Horn Quartet live at the 2021 Northeast Horn Workshop. So glad to have you all here. And this is, of course, part of the Northeast Horn Workshop. This is a special live edition, live and in person, at least virtually, of the Horn Call podcast. My name is James Bolden. I'm the publications editor for the International Horn Society, and I'll be your host today. But I want to put as much of the focus as I can on our special guest today, the members of the American Horn Quartet. So I think most listeners would probably be familiar with you, but maybe we could go around and just have you introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hi, James. First of all, my name is Carrie Turner. And I am actually a dual citizen, American and Luxembourger. So that's why we got this. This is where I worked for forever in the Philharmonie in Luxembourg. So, then pass it on to you.
I get my technology sorted out here. Hi, I'm Jeffrey Winter. I originally hail from Seattle, Washington, but I left there probably in 1980 was, I think, the last time I actually lived in the area, and started out playing horn in Venezuela, and then moved on to Germany. And I've been principal horn in the Beethoven Orchestra of Bonn now since 1989. So that's quite a while. And off to you.
Hi, James. I am, like you, I'm Christina Mosher-Turner. I am, like you, an alum of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm originally from Oregon, and I moved to Berlin in 1994 to do my master's degree there. And I just fell in love with Europe and stayed. So I played for 5 years in various orchestras in Berlin, and I was in the Odense Symphony Orchestra in Denmark. For several years, I was solo horn of the Brussels Philharmonic, and then I moved to Luxembourg, and now I'm back in Brussels.
Hello, my name is Frank Lloyd. I'm the only non-member of the group here, a guest, and I've very much enjoyed playing with the group again. My music career started in Cornwall in the UK. I was in the Royal Marines for a few years before going to Royal Academy, and then to Scotland for my first orchestra. After 19 years in London, after that, I went to Germany, and that was in 1997. Where I took up the professorship at the Folkwang Hochschule, which is now the Folkwang University of Arts. And I've just retired from there at the end of February. So I'm enjoying my first few weeks of retirement doing this.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to mention that your regular fourth horn player, Denise Tryon, could not be here today, but I don't think you could have found anyone better to sit in that chair besides Denise.
Yes, there's a little story behind this, actually. Frank has actually played with the group as a replacement before. It has happened over the years that one of us could not get free for a quartet concert, so Frank has done it. But it all really came together in China at a huge Chinese horn festival 3 years ago, and where Denise was with us. That was the first launch of the new American Horn Quartet, and Frank was there as well as a soloist. So we asked him to join us on Kozlov Tetuan, and Denise went home early, so he joined us on a portion of those concerts as well. So he has tradition with us as sort of the fifth member of the group.
Wonderful. And I guess I should have asked this at the beginning, just to make sure that I'm being as respectful of your time and schedule as we need to be. When do we need to finish this up? Because I could go for like 6 hours with questions about things, but we don't have that much time.
It's more or less open-ended. They've been really, really cool here at the Philharmonie, very loose and very relaxed. And so, we don't need to go forever, but because we're tired after the concert. But I like talking to you guys, so that'll be no problem. We can. Well, sure. There's no time limit particularly.
Okay, yeah, and you can kind of you can give me a subtle signal or something like this when when it's time to be done.
It's actually the only people we have to think about is our technical crew. So whenever you guys are ready to take off, let us know.
They'll just cut the feed, and then
That's right. That's right.
So I thought a good place to start, and I want to just say first, I was at one of your first farewell concerts in 2015 in Los Angeles, and I just remember thinking, gosh, this is the end of an era. It's I came up listening to American Horn Quartet recordings, as I'm sure many folks out there did, and just, I'd heard horn quartets before, but then I got the Well-Tempered Horn and listened to that CD, and it's like my mind was just blown. And so I think it would be nice to maybe talk about how the quartet got started. You mentioned that all of you in various ways were working professionally in Europe. How did you cross paths with one another, and how did the quartet come to be a reality?
I think I'll chime in on that one for a bit. Sure. The original American Horn Quartet was founded by 4 Americans who lived in Europe, actually in 1982, with David Johnson and Sean Scott, and help me here,
Bob Pate?
No, John Levin and
Glenn Bjorling.
Glenn Bjorling. And they got together, and it was just to have a good time for the most part. But then David and John Levin decided, you know what, we'd actually like to try and make this go mainstream. And Glenn and the other fellow, they weren't so interested. So John and David started looking for other people to come and join the group to take it seriously. That is to say, try and make horn quartet the same kind of ensemble you'd expect to see with string quartets or with piano trios in chamber music concerts. And David knew me from Seattle because he also hails from that area. And David heard Carrie play at the horn competition in Geneva in 1985. And so David and John said, hey, let's give it a try with these two fellas. So we did, and we got together and we spent many, many hours rehearsing repertoire, which we would probably never play again today because it's probably a little bit too basic for what our normal concerts would entail. But what that gave us was a real thorough basis, a real fundamental understanding of not just what it is to play music together, but how to make it work so that we all breathe the same way, we all articulate the same way, we all do dynamics the same way, and getting into the habit of the interaction, the discussion, the respect that you have to show the other members in the group. And that also means understanding that if somebody turns around and says, hey, I don't think that sounds right, they're not attacking you. It's because they're also interested in having it sound the best it possibly could be. And oftentimes we've told our audiences, I'd rather have Christina come and say, you know, Jeff, I think we could probably tidy that up there, make that sound a little tighter, than to have somebody after a concert walk up to me and say, gee, you guys played great, but how come it wasn't together at letter S or something like that? So it became our goal, and we all worked really well together in trying to achieve a really supreme ensemble playing together in that sense. And at first that sort of took the priority, but then after we made things really hook up together like a machine, then we decided, we could say, okay, now let's try and put some of this idea musically here, this musically there. And that's how we developed into the ensemble that we became shortly thereafter, winning competitions as in chamber music situations where we're playing not only against other brass groups, but woodwinds and string groups as well. Which showed that, really we were able to achieve the same sort of level of playing that you expect to hear in the most upper echelons of chamber music concert halls in Europe, especially, and in the rest of the world as well. Over the years, various members have decided to discontinue for all sorts of reasons. John left originally in 1990 because of health reasons. And actually, that's probably the same reason, very easy to say that Charlie Putnam, who replaced John, why he had to retire as well. He had a very close brush with death. But fortunately, everything worked out okay, but it was just then too much for him to continue with the heavy schedule of both orchestra and quartet at the same time. David also came to a point where he couldn't do it anymore. And so that's when we managed to get Christina to join us, and which was a lucky thing for us because we all really worked together so well. Denise came along, as Carrie explained, during a lucky trip to China, where Frank was there as well. And since then, we've been trying to get back out there, but this virus thing has put a little bit of sand in the wheels.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that answer. And, listening to you guys, I it sounds like you still got it. So I don't think there's any worries there as far as getting back into the swing of things. So I don't think anybody would disagree. So, so going back to how you got to the level where you are, obviously everybody in the group can play, but in terms of the intensity and the focus of a rehearsal, I mean, a lot of horn quartets, they just get together and they read some quartets and they have a good time and then they go get a drink or some dinner or something. And that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of, preparing for a competition, or you're trying to book gigs, and as you said, you're in competition with all the other chamber groups out there, trying to book a concert series or trying to book a tour, how do you get to that point of just making sure that you drill down and get to all those details? I imagine we have a lot of students listening in or who will listen to the recording of this. So, tips and things to really take your chamber group to the next level, or some things you've gleaned over the years.
I'll start with that. So then if you guys want to pick them on it, you can. It's very important that everybody prepares their parts well in advance and prepares them well, because in the early days, we would meet on a long weekend. We were young, so we can go all day long. We would rehearse 6, 7, 8 hours on a Saturday and 6, 7, 8 hours on a Sunday. And then we'd all drive home to our various orchestra gigs. And, and then we would do that about once a month. And that's how we prepared for tours and concerts. And while we were resting between rehearsal periods, we would discuss the business. Back then we had Brass Bulletin and the International Horn Society Horn Call to help us with advertisement and organization. And, but this was all pre-internet. So we were writing letters and making phone calls and that sort of thing. So it was a very different game. But I think the most important part about us working together is that everybody had to practice their parts well in advance. For this particularly, we had such limited rehearsal time. We were even sending emails back and forth about tempos, and I even found a recording of that Bach fugue we did that I heard on TV that was much faster than we had ever envisioned. So I sent that to them and said, maybe we ought to up the speed a little bit on this. We discussed that for a while, and this is even before we ever met and played. We were discussing all these details in advance, and we talked about the program and who was going to talk and who was going to discuss what. So we did all of our preparation in advance, so that when we got together, we could just be right to business, and sat down and we started playing. And also cues were all written in our parts already. Everybody had written it exactly who gives what cues, how long the fermatas are. It was all very well planned in advance. And it's always kind of been that way with the American Horn Quartet. These guys were really, really, hard policemen about making sure everything was written in your part, and that you did exactly like you did the last time we met. There were no free spirits suddenly in the middle of the group. And also we delegated responsibilities. So one person, I obviously doing a lot of the talking and a lot of the composing. And Jeff did a lot of the online work and all the computer business. We've kind of shared a lot of the hustling part of it. And we dealt, and after concerts, for instance, it was always Charlie's responsibility to pick up the folders and make sure we have our mutes, because we were out front signing CDs or whatever. So we delegated different tasks, setting up chairs, setting up the shell behind us. So everybody had something they had to do, so that not one person was holding the ball, which is so often the case. So often you have one guy that does everything, and that guy gets really bitter and sick of it, and the group folds. So that's never really been the case with us.
Oh, that's an awesome answer. Well, sorry, sounds like I was about to jump in on Christina's. Go ahead.
No, not at all. It's fine. I was just going to kind of dovetail with what Carrie was saying, that I think that one of the secrets of a successful chamber music group is that all of the members of the group share the same vision for the group. You have to make that group a high priority. If three of the people in a quartet decide, we really want to make it, we want to do competitions, we'd like to tour, we would like to make a name for ourselves, and the other guy just like, now let's just drink beer and play quartets and go home, then everybody is going to have disappointment, because you haven't decided that you all value the group in the same way. So I think that something that has made the American Horn Quartet so successful over the years is the willingness to make sacrifices for the group, time-wise, and simply a matter of making that group and those tours absolutely holy, so that you can shove all kinds of other things out of the way, paying for subs if you have to, whatever it takes. So I think that that's a very, very important element. Another thing I think that makes a chamber music group work is you can have 4 really stellar soloists in a quartet, but if you don't have the willingness to play together as a chamber group, to listen to one another, to subsume your own individuality into the group, and then only you come out when you need to for solos, then you end up with, it's like some of these football teams where you have a bunch of prima donnas, but there's absolutely no cohesion and they're not going to win games. So I think one of our secrets is that we really think that the quartet is more important than the rest of us all put together.
Well, that's fantastic. And I was going to ask Frank a question, since, you've mentioned that you've played with the group before, but you were very much kind of coming into this program and, filling in for someone. How do you approach it'd be like if you were subbing with an orchestra, right? And it's an established section and you're going to have to try to fit in. Do you have any tips or suggestions for those that may encounter a situation like that in their own careers of, fitting in as quickly as you possibly can?
It's Kerry has already mentioned this as one of the most important factors at all is learning the dots. That's how we say it, learning the music before you get there. So you can concentrate on the contact and the musical elements, the breathing, and all of the finer points of making music, in chamber music, and not wasting any time or diverting your attention to reading your music. Still learning your music. There's nothing more frustrating than being in a chamber group and there's one person who hasn't learned the music and is always 2 steps behind everybody else because they're still learning their part. That holds everybody else up, and it's very frustrating and time consuming until you can get them on board. And it's the same thing working with an orchestra. I'm quite often working with a chamber orchestra, and the first thing I'll do is look at the rep. Oh, I don't quite know what symphony is that. It's a Köchel 543 or whatever. I'm going to look it up. What key is it in? It's really important for us as horn players. What key is it in? If it's going to be a classical piece, Haydn, Mozart symphony, you really want to know what key it's in. So, and if you need to, you're going to download the music. It's very easy to do that these days and get prepared. So there's not any surprises when you arrive up, and you're not going to disappoint anybody who books you because you're a well-known player. They expect you to be able to produce the goods, and you're doing it for your own benefit as well, playing to the standard that is expected of you. Preparation is really the most important thing, I could say.
Thank you. One of the things that before I heard the group in person many years ago, I had only previously listened to recordings of you, and just listening to it as kind of an uninformed student, I would have assumed that you all played the exact same horn, the exact same mouthpiece, and just because of the cohesion in the group. But obviously you all play different equipment depending on your own needs and things like that. So could you talk a little bit about, maybe first, people probably, there are those that would want to know what kind of horn do you play and what kind of mouthpiece? That might be an interesting way to get into the conversation of, you play different equipment, obviously, but how do you get similar articulation, similar sound to where it sounds like a great chamber group and not 4 different people?
I'll start, and you guys can chime in. When I first started with the American Horn Quartet, 3 of those guys were already playing Paxmans. Actually, John was playing a Con 8D. But Jeff and David were playing Paxman triples, and they told me straight away, you're probably going to need a Paxman triple to play this rep. And I was playing an Alex 103, like so many people working in Germany. And so I bought the Paxman triple, and yeah, it did up my abilities to play with the group, and it also helped the blend and establish the sound of the group. Over the years, we all kind of went rogue with different instruments. Now I'm playing a horn by Dietmar Dirk. Christina's playing on a Rico Kuhn. And Frank, on this particular gig, you're playing your Alex. You've gone back to Alex 103. Denise, I think, plays a Rauch, right? Is what she usually plays with the group. So yeah, we play 4 different horns now. Jeff, you're still on your Paxman? Yeah. So we all play 4. It kind of does go against traditional wisdom that says you have to have the same instrument in order to get that great blend. But anybody who has played with great players know that's not necessarily the truth. I working with these guys on this particular project, that wasn't a problem at all. Blend and intonation was not a problem. It was just individual being able to play the stupid horn. That was the hard part.
I'll jump in here just for a little bit. I'm playing still a Paxman horn. It's a model 72 from 1987. For some reason, I've always been a big fan of Paxman horns from the 1970s and the 1980s. Probably because I encountered those horns when I was in college. They were very popular in Los Angeles at the time, and I've been chasing them down ever since. But what we have discovered over the years is that really, a horn does influence the sound that a person has, but really it's 70% who's playing the horn. You could hand a horn like mine to Frank, and he probably wouldn't sound all that different than he does on his 103, even though the instruments are incredibly different. The bores are very different. One is a triple horn, the other one is a regular double horn, but because it's mostly the chops of the person who's actually playing. And I'm convinced. I mean, I've talked to many horn players who listen to our CDs, and if you listen to them carefully, you know exactly who's playing what. You recognize, say, David Johnson's sound from back in the first CDs that we recorded. You know that David is playing that line. You know that Carrie is playing that line, and Jeff or John. It's actually very easy to hear who's playing what. But that also gives you the advantage. You don't have 4 absolutely identical sounds, so you can plan something. We have a piece by a favorite friend and composer of ours, Walter Perkins, and he wrote a concerto for us, which is 5 movements. It has an introduction and then 4 movements, each featuring one of the members of the group. And Walt heard us play, and he thought, wow, David's sound is so big and round. I'll give him this improvisational slow movement. Carrie's got this fantastic technique and can just go everywhere, so we'll give him this super fast movement. Jeff's really boring, but he can play 6/8 really well, so we'll give him that. And Charlie, of course, playing low horn, he got his special burlesque where he got to dance around as a low horn player in a piece that, very untypical for low horn, because it was like something you'd expect a flute to play, but it was in the bass clef for low horn. So there are advantages to that as well. And we use that to actually make our ensemble more interesting for the audience to listen to.
Thank you. Now speaking of new pieces and new repertoire, you mentioned, of course, everybody should come into the first rehearsal basically having learned their part. But let's say, Carrie's working on a new piece for the group or wants to try some things out. How does that work in a rehearsal where you're basically tackling brand new repertoire for your ensemble?
The first thing I'd say is, Carrie, if it's really hard, don't give it to me.
How do we do that? Well, we actually did this because before we did the last tour before the pandemic, I had written in a setting of She Moved Through the Fair, an Irish folk song that I've always loved. And I wanted to do some special effects in there that included Denise had to do multiphonics. So I contacted her and said, can you do these multiphonics? Can you sing this while playing? And I wanted to have somebody leave the stage, and do you have enough time to leave your chair? And I asked them straight out, will you pull this off? If you get up and leave during that spot, play that and come back. And so I'll write the piece by hand, manuscript, thinking about the player. When I write on our arrangements and the compositions, it says K, G, K, and D. It doesn't have first, second, third, and fourth. It has our initials of who's playing it. And I send it to Jeff, who then will make nice computer parts for us, and then we send the parts out. Everybody has a chance to look at it, and we come back. Now, the thing about my music is that this group already knows how to play my stuff, so I don't need to explain that much. Really, they pretty much know what's going to happen. In fact, they'll even change stuff. They've changed stuff very often in my pieces. Now, let's do this. Let's switch that part. There's been times special effects when they've changed things, so they do that pretty well. When we have a brand new piece that we're going to be working on, we have to sit like everybody else. We have to kind of sit down and reconstruct it and figure it out. Have the score in front of us and listen to a recording if there is one. But basically, I'll talk them through it once on one of my new pieces or new arrangements, and they pretty much get it right the first or second time, usually.
No, that's great. So for those that have been, like myself, as I'm sure many listening to this are longtime fans of the group, of the many, many tours and performances you've done all over the world. Do you have any favorite stories? They can be silly. They can be just sort of lighthearted. I mean, anything that comes to mind. I know you probably hate questions like that, but anything that stands out to you?
There are so many stories. And I have to say, coming into the group rather late in its history, I think I started in 2008, 2009. I was the heir to hearing all of these stories. Oh, the last time we were here, this thing happened or that thing happened. And so I was so excited to finally make some stories of my own. Some of them are silly. Some of them are wonderful. But I do remember one moment that always makes me laugh when I think about it. We were on tour and we were heading on the ferry from France over to the UK. But officially, you have to have a work permit. And the school that was having us as a guest had not done the paperwork for us. So we had to enter very discreetly as tourists. And so Carrie made a point of saying, maybe put your horns underneath something, be really discreet and just, don't let them know you're professional musicians because they'll start asking questions. So we got to the ferry. We had about half an hour extra time before we got on the boat, standing on the docks. And so what do? We all pulled our horns out and just started playing. And Carrie about had a coroner. He said, "Put your horns away." And we thought, this is great. So we're sitting there right on the edge of the ocean, playing the Siegfried Call and playing Beethoven 3 trios. So we do have fun moments like that too.
There's lots of great tales we have from our first trip to Japan. One of them would take way too long to relate here at this point, but I just suddenly remembered another one. When we went to Japan in 1994, is that correct? That's the competition? And in Tokyo.
92, the competition was 92.
So 92, oh gosh, it was even earlier. Well, it was a competition. We traveled out there at our own dime, and we had no idea if we were going to be successful or not. But it turns out we were quite successful, and we ended up staying well nearly 3 weeks, including the concerts that we won as part of our prize. And I remember when it came time to fly back from Narita Airport, the plane takes off late at night there to come to Europe, and we had to check out of our hotel rather early. So we had the whole day to kill with all of our suitcases and luggage. And if I remember right, we went to a market somewhere, and Kerry felt that his attire for the plane was maybe a little bit, he hadn't had a chance to do laundry or whatever, so he thought he'd buy a T-shirt at the market. Now he remembers. And so he bought this T-shirt, and it had some sort of kanji symbols on there. He didn't know what it meant. But anyway, he changed his shirt, and then we went off to the airport. And we got into the airport, and people would, they'd say something in Japanese, and Carrie's like, I don't know, what's the matter? And they're going, and they'd say stuff in Japanese. Of course, none of us spoke Japanese, and there were a few people who tried to translate it, and they were saying, flying spirit, spirit flies, spirit coming down. And finally, it wasn't until we actually got on the plane somebody spoke good enough English to be able to tell us actually what it was. And it was kamikaze.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we were getting on the plane. Everybody's, what's he doing on the plane with that shirt?
Don't read the subtext there. Yeah, that's
Yeah, that was crazy. I walked going down to the restrooms in the back of the plane caused quite a stir with my shirt on there. Everybody stared at me in horror. But I have a short, funny story. We were in Melbourne at the National Academy quite a while ago, and we were doing a radio interview like we're doing now. I got an interview on the radio there, and we sat around the table. The guy had the CDs prepared, and it was going well. And while he was talking to me, he suddenly looked up above my head. I'm talking alone like I'm doing now. And he got up and left the whole studio and just left, shut the door, and we're live on the radio. So I just kind of took over the interview like, so Jeff, where are you from? And Dave, what kind of horn do you play? And I just kind of crotched on for about 15 minutes, or it seemed longer. And then finally the guy came back in again and told us that a bunch of firemen had just showed up in the studio and claimed there was a fire in the studio. But instead of stop the broadcast, he just let me continue to talk and stay on kill time on the air while he went over and checked out what the problem was. I'll never forget that.
He figured you're a performer. You'll just vamp till, so.
Apparently.
Now, Frank, I want to congratulate you on your recent retirement. It sounds like you're staying very busy, even in retirement. What's next for you? I don't think there'll be any shortage of offers for gigs and performances and things, but how do you plan to spend some of that time?
Well, the next gig I have is actually an online chat with Pat Hughes in Austin, Texas, in 2 weeks, I think, 1 or 2 weeks. But as for performing, I've just cancelled a performance that there was going to be a chamber music week in Norway in June through various reasons. And otherwise, there's not really very much. There's some competitions this year and some summer camps. There's the Kendall Betts Horn Camp, which is going to be happening online in June. So that'll probably be the next thing. But I've got a list of projects produced for me by my dear wife. And I think the first one is painting the house and getting some projects done in the garden. So I think I'm going to be busy, and we're locked down anyway. So there's we've just gone into now COVID wave 3 lockdown in Germany. So we're not going to be moving at least until April the 18th, when we'll have the next report as to how it's going to move from there. So there's lots of projects to do at home apart from practicing the horn. So I'm going to be kept busy in one way or the other.
Well, I wish you the best with all of that, and I hope that you remain in good health. I know that you're also an avid birding fan. You share that with my former teacher and Christina's former teacher, Doug Hill.
Oh yeah, great! I found some really good live feeds from American bird tables that you can log into, and it's a live stream. And as I'm practicing, you can just have that on and just passively watch the birds and have a bird book close by from the Audubon, so you can check out the different species. Because there was one really cool site which is situated in Alabama, and they're just the warblers are just starting to migrate. So it's getting really interesting because they're going to be coming through on the way north. So that's very interesting, and that's, yes, as you just said, that's one of my hobbies.
Yeah, I imagine that's quite relaxing to watch.
Yeah, because you don't have to participate. You can just be very passive about it, but it's really interesting. Increasing my US bird count. I want to thank you all again so much for giving of your time. I know you want to go celebrate this fantastic concert you just gave, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I had two kind of, I guess, big picture questions, and then, we'll kind of let these kind of play out. The first one is, and I like to ask folks that have had, such amazing careers as you have and continue to have, are there things now that you wish you had known when you were starting out? If you could talk to yourself 25, 30 years ago and say, hey, you're going to want to know this. What's one or two things you would just kind of wish you had known getting out of the gate?
One for me might sound counterintuitive, but I think I would go back and tell my former self not to over prepare for auditions, because I tended to get a little bit obsessive with it. I know a lot of people have this method that they go through 6 months before, 3 months before, and they have this incredible checklist. But I find when I go into too much detail, too close to the event, then I lose my focus. So I have to start off with kind of a big picture and then work my way into the details. But towards the time of the audition, just relax and just play and just go out there kind of with almost like a killer instinct and just go for it. And I think that quite often when I was younger, I would choke up because I was so stuck in the details. And I wish I had known that at the time.
I'll sort of answer that question backwards. I'll look back at something which I did do, which I would highly recommend to anybody else at this point. And that is competitions. When I first went to Europe, I was just happy that I'd gotten the job. And it was only after I'd met up with David and with Carrie, I realized, hey, I'm still young enough to actually do solo competitions, not just with the quartet, but as a soloist as well. And, looking back at that was one of the smartest things I ever did. It really helped me train and focus to prepare pieces at the highest level I possibly could. So that's something I can encourage all aspiring musicians to do, not just horn players. I was talking to Frank the other day, and one of the things I hear now is the level of horn playing is so much higher than what I can hear nowadays than it used to be. I kind of wonder if I would have had any success at the competitions that I did, but I'm really glad that I did do them now, because it really taught me what steps you have to do to work a piece up to the level where you can really make everybody pay attention and listen to what you are saying with your music.
That's great advice. Go ahead, Carrie.
One quite serious, and it sounds worse than it really is, but I wish somebody had told me exactly how boring orchestra life can be. It's pretty astounding, especially when you're used to playing with horn quartet or with Christina as a duo, as a soloist. You sit down in the orchestra, and my job here for many years was on third horn, and it was astoundingly dull a lot of the time. The concerts were spectacular, and that's not to say I was better than they were. They were really great. It just, the rehearsals were so tedious and long, and day in and day out, and I think you have to really analyze, if you're a horn player or a musician in general, is orchestra really something you can do for the rest of your life? Because it could be, most players that I know have found times when it was just intolerably dull. And I think I would have liked to have known that. And the other thing I wish that I would have known is I should have moved to New Zealand back last February, because those guys really came out of this really darn well. And I would have just stayed down there for a solid year and a half.
Good point.
For my part, I would have worked more on my basics then, because I really ended up having to do things in reverse. I could always play stuff, and I left out a lot of the real basic technique of horn playing. And it wasn't until I'd already been in an orchestra for 2 or 3 years that I realized things were going to have to change. And because coming from the Marines, I got a lot of bad habits, a lot for marching band and everything. I was using a lot of pressure, and it's like I said, I could always play stuff, but it was really not going to hold me in good stead for the duration. And so I was already in an orchestra by then, and I realized I was really going to have to change things. So we're moving back to London, going to the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I moved to third horn primarily, and it gave me a chance to start working at my technique. Now, a good technique is not flying around playing fast stuff. It's getting your support right, your breathing right, and all of the basics, which gets the air moving and how you're going to use that air. That is the most important thing that we have. And I didn't really have that then. And I had to go back to the beginning again. I would have liked to have had a really good training. My first teacher wasn't even a horn player. Have a really good grounding on that, because a good technique, breathing, support system is going to get you a lot further than just good talent. Technique is going to be more important. That will hold you in good stead and last you through your career, primarily. That's something I wish that I would have had a chance to have had and not have to play catch up later on, several years down the line, when I was already professional, and going back to square one as a professional and doing your basics and having to still play to the standard expected of you and make changes at the same time is not a lot of fun, but it was necessary.
That's amazing. That's probably several lifetimes worth of professional advice from the four of you in 5 short minutes. Thank you for that. Well, and I guess to wrap things up, I think this being the Horn Call podcast, it might be a good place to kind of bring things to a close by asking you to maybe share just a little bit about the importance of the International Horn Society to you, either personally or to your group as a whole. However you want to tackle that question.
I would normally defer to Madam Vice President for that, but I can say a few words. I mean, I've been a member forever. Interestingly enough, I wasn't a member when I was younger. But William C. Robinson was one of my teachers, and he was very instrumental in setting up the International Horn Society. In fact, he was the first president, and he started it, the organizer. And he basically insisted that I join. When I moved to Europe, it wasn't a big thing over here, and so I stopped being a member of that. But when the American Horn Quartet started and we played, we were invited to the huge celebration, 20th anniversary in Tallahassee. And I saw the huge support that people had, the almost bordering on fanaticism for not only horn and horn playing, all kinds of horn playing, from jazz to avant-garde and classical repertoire. But they really liked us a lot, and they've always been our principal fan base. And so I started a whole love affair with it. And over the years, you get to know so many people from around the world, and the only time you see them is when you go to the IHS things. And when the American Horn Quartet travels around the world, we meet up with these wonderful people again. But it's wonderful to have this big sort of family reunion at the International Horn Conference.
I agree.
My very first membership in the IHS was a gift from my teacher in high school. It was Professor Edward Kammerer at the University of Oregon, an incredible man. He sadly died back in 1993 of cancer. But he had started up the Emerald Horn Club, the Green Hornists. And as a young, fresh-eyed horn player, I was so excited to come down and play with some adults and play horn ensembles. And I still remember my last year of high school that he had a guest there and he said, "Oh yeah, you remember that book that I gave you last year, Phil Farkas? Well, he's going to be here tomorrow." So his daughter lived in Eugene, and I got the chance to meet and chat with Philip Farkas. And so for me now, I realize at the time, I thought, oh, he's just a guy that had the funny pictures with the embouchure in his book. But I realized that actually he's kind of in many ways, the father of American horn playing. And it was an incredibly important experience. Many years later, I rejoined the International Horn Society. My very first regional workshop was Mid-South in 1990. And I still remember hearing Freuda's whistling duets with herself and thought that was pretty remarkable. But also I was so impressed with the variety of horn players that would show up for these events. Many years later, I went to the International Horn Symposium in Valencia and was able to perform there. And that's where I found my Rico Kuhn horn. And gradually in London, it was Ken Pope who convinced me to stand for the advisory council. That was 7 years ago. And these last 7 years have been remarkable. I don't think I would have ever expected how much of my life it would take over in really good ways. And I've had the opportunity to be the editor of the digital newsletter for the past 6 years, Horn and More, and help a lot of people tell their stories. And I've also been the vice president now for the past 5 years. One of my main goals has been to, once again, to bring the I back into focus in the IHS, to make it a very international organization and to kind of ramp up the participation in Europe, in Asia, and around the world, because we're a global family of horn players, and that meant a lot to me.
Well, as you probably know, I've had a long, long association with the International Horn Society, but it goes back a long way. My very first experience with the International Horn Society was as a Paxman player invited to the Montreux Horn Workshop way back in the mid-70s, when it was in conjunction with the Brass Symposium as well. It was a joint symposium, and I was invited to play on the stage. We were walking around playing in quartet, and it was arrangement of the Bach Badineri from the B minor flute. Crazy thing. And Barry Tuckwell was walking past. He heard us playing this, and he said, "You're playing that tonight on the stage." So we were straight up on that stage. From that performance, I was invited to the International Horn Society workshop in East Lansing a couple of years later, and that was really that gave my career a huge boost, because then from then on, I was asked again, and so developed the long and wonderful association I've had with the International Horn Society, performing at many workshops, becoming an honorary member and president of the Horn Society twice. And it's been a great honor to be a member. And I've found and met so many wonderful people and so many friends, which I know I'll have in my heart for the rest of my life. And I will not forget such wonderful times we've had on the symposia throughout the years. And like I said, I've got some really very fond memories and some great friends that I've met along the way.
I remember as a youngster hearing about the International Horn Society, but and even though I had a lot of talent as a youngster playing horn, and I loved playing in orchestras and bands, my parents didn't seem to think it was a priority to invest the money in a membership, or let alone attend a festival, even if it was nearby. It wasn't until I was in the American Horn Quartet and we were invited to play at the IHS in Tallahassee that I really said, there are so many wonderful people here, people that you get stuck in your orchestra. You've got these 3 or 4 or 5 people that you deal with all the time, and maybe you get asked to play in an orchestra somewhere nearby once in a while. It's not a very big world. It's not a whole lot of horn players. But the IHS and being able to attend, especially one of the international symposiums, you get to see so many wonderful people, and it's like you saw them yesterday. And that's why for myself, it's really a treat every time I do get a chance to attend. It's the social and interacting with other people and being able to hear what other people have done with their horn playing since the last time you saw them. It's really a wonderful organization for keeping in touch.
I want to thank all four of you again, Frank Lloyd, Christina Masha-Turner, Jeff Winter, Carrie Turner, for giving so freely of your time for this live edition of the Horn Call podcast. And congratulations again on your recital, and good luck with everything, and be well. And I hope to speak with you and see you in person as soon as possible.